Conversations across time, 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 across time, conversations 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 across time.
Welcome. My name is Vivienne Crawford. Welcome to Conversations Across Time. My co-host seated next to me is former State Representative Babette Josephs. Welcome, Babby.
Thank you so much.
Great to have you back.
Thank you.
Conversations Across Time is the television show that seeks to engage you in history. We have discussions that are imaginary conversations which would happen between historical personalities. We discuss history, but we also discuss what is going on today. How did the history makers make what we think today as just the way that it is? What would they tell us if they lived today? Joining us for what we hope will be a lively and interesting conversation tonight are, seated to my immediate right, Mr. Karl Marx. Welcome.
It's good
Mr.
to be
Marx.
back again, Ms. Crawford.
Thank you for being here, and thank you for coming back after your last exit.
Yes, of course.
Seated next to Mr. Marx is Queen Marie Antoinette. Thank you once again, Queen Antoinette, for being with us.
Merci and bonjour.
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 And seated next to Marie Antoinette is, you know, I talk about my favorite characters in history, but President Franklin Roosevelt is certainly one of my favorite characters, one of the, just someone who impacted everything that's going on today. So welcome, President Roosevelt.
Thank you for letting me come.
So as you can guess by the makeup of the panel, what we intend to discuss tonight is income disparity, because what is going on in this country today is just, I think it's sinful. And I'm happy to have these panelists because I think they will bring something new and exciting to today's discussion. So I'm going to ask you first, Mr. Marx, because I'm sure when you examine what's going on in this country today in terms of, not just this country, but in the world.
May I interrupt you 1 second,
Please.
Ms. Crawford? Would you please address me as Comrade Marx? I would appreciate that.
I will, Comrade Marx.
Thank you.
I will remember that. I'm going to write it down. I want to make sure I address you as Comrade Marx.
Thank you.
So, that being said, Comrade Marx, have you any particular opinions about what is happening in the world today in terms of income disparity?
First of all, I warned the American people on one of the panels that I was on prior to this show about the ramifications of income inequality. And what you saw happen in Ferguson and what you saw happen in Baltimore are not just a result of police confrontation with a minority community, but they're the frustrations of that minority community with the income inequality and what is going on in this country. My theory is based on the fact that capitalism will create income inequality. And what is happening in the United States today is the gap between the very wealthy and the middle class and the poor is widening and becoming tremendously problematical.
There's
and there will be
no middle class left.
there will be a revolution.
and I was
and
thinking
your
that
other
as- before
guest,
you said it, yeah.
your other guest, President Roosevelt, faced the same problem. However, he was able to get the Congress, which I'm not sure you people can do now, to pass legislation to stem the tide and to bring the groups together, and the middle class started to make progress, and of course the war also. However, the revolution will come, and unless something is done in this country about the income inequality, there will be a problem, and people will lose their heads, just like the lovely queen sitting next to me lost her head because of income inequality and the disdain for the rich for the poor.
Well, what you're saying is that when people have nothing to lose, which is the way we are headed, then they take desperate measures. And I agree with you.
Yes,
I agree with
that's why there were riots in the streets.
you. Riots?
Yes.
What riots? You mean those bikers shooting each other, or what did you have in mind?
No,
She's talking about Waco, Texas.
I'm
The bikers in Waco, Texas, was that the riot you
well,
referred to?
that was an economic thing in Waco, Texas. I don't think that was just a bunch of crazy bikers. But I'm
They're
talking
all
about.
white, so of course it wasn't economic, right? Or they were mostly white.
But I'm talking about the riots in Ferguson and Baltimore.
Why was it a riot in Ferguson? It was a protest.
Comrade Marx, here's what I think is interesting about this, because I think I know where Babette is coming from with this one. And why is it that when the participants are white,
It's not a riot.
it's a fight, it's a whatever. But when they're African American,
Then
it's a riot. I think, did I
Yes,
get?
yes, and when you look at the media, now I didn't make this up, I read this on HuffPost, but if you look at the words the media uses in Ferguson, in Baltimore, in Cleveland, and you know, those sea cities in Ohio, there are so many of them.
Cleveland, Cincinnati.
Right, Columbus.
Columbus, yes.
They're always, the media uses the word riot all the time, but when it happens and most of the people are white, you know, 190 people more or less were arrested. 9 people were shot, some by the police, but nobody's calling it a riot. And that was in Waco.
Well, I would beg to differ with you on the race thing. I don't think it's a riot because of the color of the protesters or rioters' skin. I think it's the economic class of the rioters or the protesters. So if it's a lower class riot, then if it's a lower class group of people protesting, then it's a riot. And in fact, I'm going to turn to the beautiful queen here. When the French peasants stormed Versailles, was that a riot from your point of view?
Well, from my point of view, yes, I would consider that a riot.
Well, it's
And
called,
They were all white.
when I studied it, it was called food riots. So, but that's a different culture and a different
But
country.
they were all white.
Now when you do things in France, you look at what's happening to people who practice, who are Muslims. All kinds of problems. They can't wear their headscarves, the women, they can't, all this things, I don't know what the rest of it is. They can't go to college with men. All of this stuff is imposed by the French on a different kind of minority.
I have an interesting question, because as you sit here, President Roosevelt, and I just need to bring you into this discussion, because first of all, most people talk about when you became president and the things that you did. They tend not to know that a lot of the things that you did in the first 100 days of your presidency were things that you had started when you were governor of New York.
That's true, but I'd like to interject a couple of points here. Number one is the riots, the quote-unquote riots in Waco were really a drug war. There was 2 competing gangs, if not 3, And that's what started it. But let's get back to the major point and thrust of this conversation. Number one, income disparity is it's a disease. And it doesn't seem to be curable at the moment. When I was president, I was able to get my bills through Congress that we initiated as I was governor. Then it was fueled further by World War II, which created jobs and opportunities, and people took advantage of them, and they were easy to come by because everybody had to go to work. We needed every hand.
Because of the war effort.
Right, exactly. That war, while uncomfortable and unwanted, saved us.
So you're saying if we would have a third world war, we would come out with a more egalitarian society.
This is the first time in history that I agree with Karl Marx. Yeah, we're thrusting ourselves forward because of income disparity. We can't pay for education. We spend more money for prisons than we do for education.
Oh, much more.
Plus the gap between poor and the rich are widening. And it's widening every day. It isn't just...
I agree. I think it's almost obscene.
People are falling out of the middle class and becoming poor. The middle, and that's where democracy lives.
Well, one thing President Roosevelt just said falls right into my theory.
Absolutely.
And that is capitalism feeds on wars. And if there's not wars to stimulate economic activity, then capitalism has to create a diversity in terms of class and who has money and who doesn't have money. And I hate President Roosevelt, even though he said it's the first time, because he was smart enough to institute programs that saved this country from my revolution.
Right, took the steam off.
If he hadn't gotten Congress and instituted the programs, then there would have been a revolution in this country, and my revolution would have taken hold, and we would have a different kind of system of economics. And he put a Band-Aid on the system, but the Band-Aids cannot keep stemming the tide of revolution.
But let me ask this question, because a lot of the programs that you put in place, President Roosevelt, are now, there's a systematic move to unravel those programs.
Well, because that's the difference between the Republicans and Democrats, and it always has been. And it's never going to change if we can't agree. The biggest problem we have in this country is a lack of cooperation. And that's what's destroying us, and it's destroying us every day in very insensitive ways. One party doesn't care whether you go to college or not go to college, or where your family makes a living or can eat or not eat. And the other party is trying very hard to change it. Now, I'm a Democrat, and I've been a Democrat all my life. And I will say that people today are living, not really living, they're existing. And unless we further our educational goals and put more people in college and make sure they graduate, this country will die of its own weight. And it's going to happen. It may happen in our lifetime.
Certainly can't compete if we don't educate people or keep them healthy and let them move. Well, transportation, health, and education.
Well, look at the percentages of foreign students in this country today. When they graduate with their degrees, they go back to their countries.
Well,
they don't stay here. They don't contribute to our society and our way of living. And it's been forevermore. When you have a war and everybody has to unite.
Well, see, I would resist. I would really like to find an economist, I am not one, who could say the war was not what saved us. What saved us was your programs. That's what I would like to see.
Well, the war contributed to my deciding what the program should be. I mean, I didn't control the war. The war controlled us.
Yes.
And they were the ones who decided for us what we should do. And if I hadn't done or implemented those policies, we'd all be speaking Japanese.
But capitalism is contingent upon wars. And if there's never a war, capitalism will fall much faster than it's going to fall anyway, but it will fall much faster. And all we know is, look at the French Revolution. Now, of course, it was a different system. It was a feudal type system. However, there was still a wide gap between the rich and the poor. The nobility, her class, had total disdain for the poor. They
Well, ask
gambled,
her.
they
Ask her.
partied,
Did
they
you have
bought
total
jewelry, they put the country in debt. They didn't care if the peasants ate or not. They
Here's the question, because she's sitting right next to you. Did you, because my theory on you, and certainly last time you were here, we talked about this, was you were 15 years old when you began.
That is correct.
15 years old when you married Louis. Austrian, you didn't speak French.
Not a lick of French.
And what's interesting is you were not particularly interested in learning French.
I really, truly wasn't. You know, it's interesting because the president over here was brought up with an education, a background. For myself, my parents did not push me to have knowledge or wisdom. And I feel that the road that I led would be much, much different had they done that for me, had they really pushed me in the knowledge.
For education?
Absolutely.
And how about meeting, other people outside of your class?
It was overwhelming because I was not used to that. I wasn't brought up in that society.
Well,
Meeting
yeah.
with
Well, you had total disdain for people
That
not
was-
of your
Well,
class.
she did have sympathy, and I don't know about the motives, but she did have sympathy for the American Revolution and backed Lafayette and tried to get
But
the French
Ms.
to
Babette,
help
the
us.
American Revolution wasn't a lower class revolution. They were middle and upper class people themselves. It wasn't a.
But I don't think the British felt that way.
But she had
I have to agree.
total disdain, and no offense, Madam Queen, but you would have disdain for a person like myself. You would love President Roosevelt, who was born a patrician, who was from the American aristocracy. You would love him, and you would hate me because I was not of your
It's a very,
class.
very strong word.
Oh, well, I want to say something. I mean, you know me. I can't help this. So you said she would love President Roosevelt. I think
Yes.
he would. I think he would sort of liked her too.
We might have really liked each other.
I
As a
mean,
matter of fact.
Excuse me, I wish you wouldn't say that in front of Eleanor.
well, I mean, but now, President, I have much admiration for you, and I suspect that your insight into lower class and what they needed comes from the fact that you were an empathetic person. I mean, you just had, and I don't know if it was because of your polio, I just don't know what it was about you coming from such a privileged background that made you concerned for the forgotten man. I believe that's what you refer to them as, the forgotten man.
Maybe he's just smart.
Well, may I answer that?
Yes.
Number one is I was a rebel. And if I'd listened to my parents all the way through, I would have been a doctor or a lawyer. Well, I was a lawyer, but I would have been a doctor or done something else, scientist. But I chose my own path for a lot of reasons. Number one is it's not only your parents who raise you, it's your friends. And I had the kind of friends that I chose and who chose me that enabled me to give the insights to the people who were, in those cases, below me. But I lowered myself to them,
What?
and then before
Just
I
by
could
the-
raise them to me.
President
And that's-
Roosevelt, just by the words you just articulated, shows you disdain. I lowered myself to them. That's what she would say. Let them eat cake. Total
I-
disdain.
Listen here.
Total
I think
disdain.
that-
It wasn't even cake. It wasn't even a rich
Right.
texture cake. It was the crumbs from the bottom of the baking pan. Let them eat cake. What more can you say to put
It's
down?
funny that you bring up "let me eat cake," because I actually have a lovely piece of cake here. And I would like to bring up the point too, as I lovingly dive into this nice slice of piece of cake over here, that my words were highly misinterpreted. That phrase was coined when I was 10 years old.
Let them eat cake?
Exactly. And
What did it mean to you? Well, I'll let you go on, but I'm just wondering.
as I was headed to the guillotine,
Yes.
pun on pun, and the riots were starting, and I heard the voices of the people and how they were starving, and it was brought to my attention, I said, well, let them eat cake. It wasn't to make a point to say that I was a higher class They were a lower class. It was actually a bit of compassion that I had in my heart at the time.
Right, because you thought if they don't have bread, everybody has
No,
cake,
but,
right?
but, Madam Queen, you weren't talking about this type of cake. You were talking about cake is, in the French, is the crumbs that stick to the pan, in the corners of the pan. You weren't saying let them have food, let them have bread, let them have something like a nice sweet piece of
That's
cake.
your
So you're saying she
theory
was saying let
and
them
your
have
thought,
crumbs.
not
That's
mine.
exactly what she was saying, let them have crumbs, and it's a perfect example of the attitude of the,
No, maybe. Are you hungry for cake?
not that kind of cake. I would
Are
like,
you sure? Are you sure?
yes, I'm sure.
Because as I have this in my hand, I'm pretty sure it tastes pretty darn good.
But that's not the cake you wanted to give to the peasants. You wanted to give the peasants the
Maybe I
crumbs.
should have you try a little.
Oh my!
Wow.
Well, you know, wait a minute. We just listen, Queen Antoinette. I just want to say we had a hard time getting Miss Comrade Marx to come back. Comrade Marx stormed off the last time
Let
he
me
was.
get this crumb off your face.
That's
might
exactly
like
what did you give to the peasants,
That's
the
what you
crumb off
think.
my face.
That's
You
what
didn't
you
want to
think.
give them cake, you wanted
That's
to
what
give
you
them the
think.
crumb off my
Excuse me.
face.
You may continue
But
to
we're
say what you want to
having
say,
a
but I
sympathy
know what
for
I
our
meant.
revolution.
I want to make
President
a
Roosevelt,
point.
please, yes, let's hear from President Roosevelt.
I
mean, we've had
think
quite a.
that you were practicing population control. We had too many people that were eating too much. You could wean, much like the Chinese and the Japanese have
Okay,
done.
limiting the population by starving them.
Right. Or off with their heads.
Well, that was Thomas Malthus' theory, that the only good thing were famines and wars, because then we could trim the
Right,
population,
exactly right.
and we didn't have to let the people grow and eat and expand the economy and have economic equality. So let's have a war and kill off a lot of people, and we won't have famine. We might have the same problem
So
down the road.
is that what you are leveling at the president? You're saying that indeed the war helped him. The war helped him.
There's no doubt about war
no
helps
question.
capitalism. I said it in the Communist Manifesto. I said it in Da Capital. Capitalism is predicated on international wars. It can't exist without the wars.
So President Roosevelt, my question to you, as we sit here today, I've often wondered. As I said, I thought it had a lot to do with the fact that you had polio and you were not, you suffered, and you could recognize suffering with other people. But also, early in your law career, you worked with some pretty underprivileged clients. Was that your first taste of what real poverty was when you were working as a lawyer
Well, I
on
was
the Lower
exposed
East Side?
to it, and frankly, my heart and feelings were toward those people, and it always has been through the complete length of my presidency. I always felt that I had enough money, and I would like to have everyone to share in the goodness of what we have as an American. And I wanted to continue that. The problem we always had, and still have today, which bothers me mostly coming back to this world, is that we haven't changed much since 1929. And the very same things that happened in 1929 are happening now. They're perking. And we're going to wind up in a very bad way because we're not supporting our military, we're not paying our money, we're not supporting pensions. They expect the young people to pay for all the mistakes that we made, and it can't happen. And it's
we're colonizing, attempting to colonize the world still. I mean, there's still the imperial note that we're sounding over and over again has not gotten any weaker.
well, imperialism isn't necessarily a bad thing.
What?
It isn't it? Right, I know you were going to disagree, but
It's
But
the
I have to tell you why.
exploitation of
If you're
because
being
if it
colonized,
wasn't
you
for
don't like it
some
much.
imperialism around the world, the world would be poorer, and it would be. And
Are you talking about the
if you were
white man's
president,
burden, perhaps?
sorry.
The white man's burden?
So your empathy
I
only
think- you wanna know
extends
what
to
I
a few
think?
poor people in the United States. It doesn't extend to the underprivileged in other countries. It didn't extend to the Jews in the concentration camps, for
Certainly
sure.
took a long time before
different,
you
right,
paid attention
and that
to
was an
that.
unfortunate
Well,
thing in
so
our history,
I
and it will
mean, you
forever be a
can't
blot.
cherry pick
But
empathy.
And if I would have serving now under those circumstances and coming through today, I probably would have changed many of the things that I thought about at the time of the war with the boat. For example, the boat problem with the Jews, and we turned them away.
Was that a strategic
I was
decision?
misinformed. And the only one in my cabinet who felt that we should have taken them in was Henry Morgenthau, who was Jewish, and one of the few Jews that I spoke to in those days. I was a product of who I was and where I've been, and my education. And unfortunately, I was unable to pick not the best minds. Open.
But wait a minute, but you because that was one of the things that I was going to bring up that was so enlightening about you in terms of you surrounding yourself with people who had expertise. I guess my question about this whole notion of you not being aware of the problem, were you busy paying attention to Great Britain? Is that why, were you focused on Britain? And so, because I for the life of me, cannot square.
Plenty of people
we had
about
big
what
problems.
was happening
Vivienne,
in
let me
Germany
explain.
to not only Jews, lots of people.
We had
Plenty
big personality problem with Joseph Stalin. Even Winston and I didn't always agree, and we didn't agree to disagree. We had massive arguments. He was stubborn, and I suppose I was. And those were our allies. Now, we also had major problems with China, Japan, Burma, India, name it. This country in those days was, we had no friends. As of today, we have no real friends. We have the best friends money can buy. That's exactly what it says.
And that's a perfect statement of capitalism. You couldn't have articulated it any better, Mr. President.
And on that note, believe it or not, we are at the end of this episode. I know that I think we're prepared to perhaps stay and talk about this further, but we're going to say to the audience, it's been our pleasure for you to join us this week. I would like you to tune in next week so that you can see the end of this fascinating discussion between these very interesting people. But as happens with Conversations Across Time, we get going and the next thing you know, we're out of time. So this has been Conversations Across Time. We invite you to join us next week to listen to the second part of this most fascinating conversation. Thank you.
Conversations across time. 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 Across time. Conversations 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 across